the roots, I think, came from what had happened during the war. During the war, there were a group of people that became known as the Tavistock Group. William Beon, John Rickman, Eric Trist, Jack Sutherland, John Bowlby, who were all in staff in army psychiatry. And they were responsible, very much led by Beon, for a series of sort of unique experiments in working with soldiers, both on problems to do with leadership and the recruitment of officers, problems to do with the treatment of soldiers withdrawn from the front because of one or other sort of mental disturbance.
The roots of Tavistock Consulting go right the way back to the roots of the clinic, which started in 1920, and to those early analysts who, during and after the World Wars, were working with the British Army, working either with groups of war veterans who at the time were said to be suffering from shell shock, which obviously we now know is post-traumatic stress disorder, or in the Second World War when the likes of Beon was working with the process of selecting leaders. So they were actually looking for a new way of selecting leaders. So rather than the usual way, they were trying to find new ways of seeing how leadership emerged from groups and how to spot a leader.
And Wilfred Beon was obviously a key player at that time, and he was a clinician, a psychiatrist, and he was interested in the mental health of the returning soldiers, but he was also interested in leadership and why things had gone awry in terms of leadership during the First World War. So he was interested in developing an understanding of leadership and the qualities needed to be a leader.
It was set up in the 1920s. It was its first psychotherapy clinic, with staff providing their services for no fee at that time. So it was an interest in the emotional life of children, adults, gradually families. John Bowlby, who's one of the famous members of the Tavistock Clinic over the years, famous for attachment theory, how infants and children become attached or not so well attached to parents and the consequences thereof. So there was an interest in the emotional life of individuals, of families, of groups, and logically one can say there's an emotional life of organisations.
And then post-Second World War, you've got this sort of interest in organisations. Just as in the First World War, Beon and colleagues were looking to rehabilitate soldiers back from the front. In after post-Second World War, of course, there's a massive effort to try and rehabilitate industry, rehabilitate Britain as a country, UK as a country.
Well, the Tavistock Clinic had been doing consultancy work with organisations for many years, but it hadn't been formally organised, and it was a matter of interest of some of the staff. But the opportunity arose to create a small organisation to provide this service, and it was the time when John Major was Prime Minister and the health service was being encouraged to find sources of income. So various things came together, and I suggested to the Chief Executive, Anton Obholzer, the idea, and he luckily supported it and helped us begin the service.
There were three areas that fed in. One was the whole group relations work that had been, as it were, started by Wilfred Beon. The second was psychoanalysis itself, particularly the object relations element of psychoanalysis. And then thirdly, there was open system theory, which had developed after the war, prompted by people in the States as well, in a way.
Somebody once said a system is not the sum of its parts, but the product of its parts. In other words, they're all interacting, and therefore it's inherently unpredictable, in fact, because things happen. If you look at it in an organisational sense, you could say that a leader or a manager in an organisation's task is to balance two natural forces in groups. One is a natural force to collaborate, get on. There's a natural force to compete and win. And according to Freud, those are necessary parts of being human beings.
What the individual issue is that is brought for discussion, whether it's individual, group, analytic, or whatever, needs to be respected and treated, but it always needs to be seen in the overall context. And the essential feature of the Tavistock approach is that the specific details need to be explored and worked with, but it always has to be seen and presented in an overall wider societal context.
And what's different for me about the system psychodynamic approach, also called the TAVI model, is that when you're using it, you're not thinking about these in different ways. You're not saying, okay, well, today we'll approach it from a psychoanalytic perspective. Tomorrow we'll do group relations, group dynamics. But what you're doing is seeing these three things as part of an interconnected context.
I think for me personally, the work we did on women leaders, because that was again a period in which there was quite a lot of energy around to do more work on why there weren't more women leaders in business and in the public sector. And I was two colleagues from a commercial consultancy interviewed 50 very senior women leaders about how they got to where they got to and what they thought the key factors were, what they thought they brought to their work that made them better than others, and what challenges they faced as well. It was a really interesting piece of work. And I think it was income generating in the sense that companies then asked us to do work to help them develop their women leaders and start women's leadership training, which is like ubiquitous now, but at the time it wasn't.
I think organisations need to have that opportunity to look at what's going on below the surface, how people are working together, rather than just focusing on outputs or outcomes, but thinking about how the work is done, how those outcomes are achieved, and what the relationships are in the organisation that can make that happen.
There's a pattern which maybe many people could recognise in their own organisations. So there's a tension between hierarchy on the one hand and openness on the other. And a gifted leader will understand that and work with both sides. Somebody who's less aware will take one side or the other, maybe, but won't be effective.
I think the thing about that we held to was the idea that in the team we wanted some people that had a clinical background, like me, like Jon Stokes, as well as people who were coming from social psychology and organisational background, like David Armstrong.
I think the work of the Tavistock Consulting has been extremely important in the professional area, but it has not been recognised adequately as a core component of the overall psychiatric psychological system as such. So there hasn't been adequate attention paid to the stress that staff are under who are there at the receiving end of all the societal and social and other disturbances that are dumped on their lap for them to deal with.
I think the work that TC does, particularly in clinical settings and particularly with teams who are really struggling with the context they're in, is there will always be a need for it. I mean, there must be, I imagine there's more need than there ever has been at the moment in the NHS. Whether there's the budget for it or whether there are the resources for it is a different question. But the need is absolutely there.
I feel very honoured to be in this role, to be taking forwards a really rich history and a really different way of thinking, which is massively pertinent to today. Even though some of these theories go right the way back to the 1920s, 1930s, I don't think there's a time where they've ever been more pertinent. I mean, in today's society, we now hear people talking about wanting psychological safety at work. We hear people talking about well-being. We hear people talking about anxiety at work. And what this model does is actually interact with and speak to those emotions. I think that not just the NHS, but businesses, public sector, voluntary sector, across the sectors can really benefit. I mean, some of the work that I've done, we see the benefit, and it's sustainable benefit, and I can't see why Tavistock Consulting can't be in 10 years, 20 years and 30 years. I wouldn't imagine I'll be directing at that point, but I certainly hope that perhaps one of the people that I've taught over the years will have taken the place by then.